I thought my dog was losing it, until I saw what was under the floor. I remember the first time Chester started pawing at that one spot near the back door. It was just a soft tapping at first, like he was testing the waters, but then it became a part of our daily routine. I'd make my morning coffee, he'd crunch through his kibble, and then, like clockwork, he'd stroll over to that same square of old hardwood, sit down, and start scratching. Scratch, pause, scratch again, every single morning. At first, I didn't think much of it. Dogs have their quirks. Chester's a big shaggy mix, maybe some golden retriever, a bit of shepherd, and something rugged like a mountain mutt. He's got those eyes that seem to understand everything, and a coat thick enough for a blizzard, even though we live in a quiet suburb of Cedar Falls, Iowa. We adopted him from a rescue in the Ozarks about 6 months ago. He'd been found wandering. No collar, no microchip, no backstory. They told me he was quiet, smart, and fiercely loyal, so I figured maybe he smelled something under the floor. Maybe he just liked the feel of the wood. But when he kept at it, same spot, same time, day after day, it started to feel like something more. I live alone in an old 2-bedroom cottage I inherited from my Uncle Sam. The place creaks and groans. When the wind picks up, and the hardwood floors, beautiful but uneven, are still the originals, the spot Chester kept returning to was near the mudroom, just before the little staircase that leads to the basement. I'd checked it out a few times, ran my hand across it, tapped it with a screwdriver, even poured some vinegar on it, thinking maybe ants were the issue, but there was never anything. Still, Chester scratched, and when he looked up at me with those eyes, steady, calm, like he was waiting, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One morning, after nearly 3 weeks of this, I gave in. "All right, boy," I said, kneeling next to him. "You win. Let's see what's going on here." I pried up the corner of the floorboard. I figured I'd find insulation, maybe a dead mouse or a crack in the foundation. What I found instead was a square metal plate, hidden beneath the dust and wood, nearly invisible if you weren't looking for it. It had a keyhole on one end and a faint worn stamp I couldn't quite make out. "What on earth?" I whispered. Chester wagged his tail like he'd been waiting for me to catch up. I didn't have a key, but I had tools in the garage. After about 10 minutes of gentle nudging with a flathead and hammer, the plate lifted. It wasn't just a plate. It was a lid, and underneath was emptiness. A chute lined with stone and wood led down into the dark. At the bottom, a narrow staircase twisted out of sight. "Chester," I said quietly, "did you just find a secret room?" I wasn't scared, at least not yet. I was more in awe. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and started down with Chester close behind. The air got cooler as we descended. I counted 22 steps before it opened into a small chamber. The walls were stone, the floor dirt. Off to one side sat a wooden shelf lined with old rusted cans and jars. In the center, beneath a thick, dusty tarp, was a trunk. I pulled back the tarp. The trunk was old, really old, with rusted iron bands and a simple latch like something from a settler's tool shed. My heart was thudding. Chester stood right beside me, tail still, ears perked. I opened it. Inside were photographs, a few bound, notebooks and what looked like maps, all carefully arranged. The photos were sepia-toned and curled at the corners. One showed a young couple standing in front of my house. Another looked like my Uncle Sam as a boy, holding a shovel and grinning. I flipped open one of the notebooks. The date read, June 4th, 1952. I read aloud, "If anyone finds this, know that we buried it here for a reason. Some things are better left where they rest. But if you're reading this, you'll understand why it had to be found." Chester let out a quiet whine. I sat there for over an hour, flipping through page after page. The stories told of strange happenings. Lights in the woods, voices at night, animals disappearing. It didn't feel like a ghost story. It felt like someone trying to tell the truth, warn us, confess maybe. Turns out my great-grandfather had used this house as a lookout. He and a small group watched something they called the shadow path. It sounded unreal, like bedtime stories meant to scare. But there were names, hand-drawn maps, sketches of the moon's phases, even old newspaper clippings. And then, tucked in the very back, was a photo I couldn't ignore. It showed a dog, shaggy, thick coat, eyes just like Chester's. The caption read, "Every few decades one returns. They always find the spot." I stared at Chester. He stared right back. I didn't know what it meant, not yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This dog didn't just wander into my life. He was meant to find me, and now it was my turn to find out. Why? When I came back upstairs to the kitchen, the morning sun had already slid halfway across the floor. My coffee was cold. Chester's food bowl hadn't been touched. He just sat at the top of the basement stairs, staring back at the hole in the floor like he was waiting for something or someone. I didn't cover the floor back up, not yet. I knew I probably should, but my hands were still trembling from what I'd seen down there. The trunk, the journals, that photo. I sat at the kitchen table and opened one of the notebooks I'd brought up. The pages crackled as I flipped through the beginning. The handwriting wasn't Uncle Sam's, and it wasn't my grandfather's either. The name on the first page was E. Howard, my great-grandfather. Entry after entry described strange things that should have scared me, but they didn't. Not really. Instead, I felt like I'd just been invited into a secret, something old, something important. He wrote about things he'd seen on the land, glowing footprints in the snow, black birds flying in strange patterns, nights when the whole house would hum, even with no power on, and always, the dogs. He wrote that in every generation, one would show up. Not just any dog, a protector, a guide, sent to keep watch over the hidden place. That part stuck with me. Chester had never barked at the mailman, never chased a squirrel, never even tried to climb on the bed. From the moment he came into my life, it was like he knew what he was here for. And now, I was starting to believe it too. I didn't go back down right away. I needed time to think, to read. That whole day, I barely left the house. Chester followed me everywhere. When I sat on the couch, he curled up beside me. When I made pasta for dinner, he rested his head by the fridge, watching me. His eyes followed me like he knew something was coming. That night, I dreamed about the cellar. In the dream, I went down alone. The stairs seemed longer, deeper. I heard whispers, not words exactly, more like memories trying to speak. At the bottom, the trunk was open again, and something behind it moved. I woke up drenched in sweat, tangled in my sheets. Chester was sitting at the foot of the bed, eyes locked on the door. The next morning, I called in sick. I grabbed an old lantern from the garage, just in case. I figured if this thing was real, if it went deeper than one hidden room, I'd need more than curiosity. I brought snacks, a flashlight. I'm not exactly brave, but I didn't want to feel like I was hiding from it anymore. This time, Chester didn't wait for me. He walked ahead, tail steady, and stopped by the hatch until I opened it again. We went down the stairs together. The lantern glowed in front of me. The stone walls felt colder this time, damp. The air smelled faintly of moss and dust, but it wasn't stale. It felt like something had moved through it. When we reached the chamber, I looked around. Something was different. The shelf. A jar had fallen onto the dirt floor. Maybe I knocked it over before, maybe not. I bent down and picked it up. Inside was a piece of paper, old yellow, thick like parchment. I carefully unrolled it. It was a map, not exactly of the house, but of the land around it. It showed crisscrossing tunnels underneath. Strange. Symbols I didn't recognize. Some places had names, old ones. One read Watchman's Path, another Hollow Gate, and one, circled in red, sat right under the word well. We used to have a well. I remembered it from when I was little, visiting Uncle Sam. He always told me to stay away, said it was dangerous, that the wood was rotting. It had been sealed up for years. I looked at Chester. "You want to check out the well, don't you?" he gave. A short, silent wag. We came back up into the kitchen, the afternoon sun shining like nothing strange had ever happened. But the house felt changed, like we'd woken something that had been sleeping a long time. The well sat at the edge of the yard, past the blackberry bushes and an old rusty shed. The boards around it were broken, but still mostly held together. I walked around it, brushing aside weeds and vines. Then I saw it, a paw print, fresh, Chester's size. But it was already there before we got there. The ground was dry, no mud, but the print looked pressed in, clear as day. Chester didn't sniff it. He just sat beside it, calm and still. That night I brought the rest of the notebooks upstairs. I started underlining things. Dates, names, anything that repeated. One name showed up over and over, Corwin. He was one of the original builders, apparently. He disappeared in 1936. But the way my great-grandfather wrote about him, it didn't sound like he died. It sounded like he left, on purpose, through something they called the Hollow Gate. There were other dogs too, named, described. One called Barlow, another Grigsby. Each one had come to the house. Each had scratched at that same spot. Each had guided someone into the cellar, and each one disappeared after. I didn't like that part, but Chester wasn't going anywhere. I could feel it. Not yet. The next morning I found Chester at the back door just staring out toward the woods, the same direction the old well faced. I let him out and followed him through the yard. He didn't rush. He walked slow and sure, stopping at the edge of the trees. There, half buried in moss, was something I'd never noticed before, a flat stone with a faded carving. I brushed the moss off with my hands. One word was carved into it. Return. Chester pawed at the edge of it, then looked up at me. What do you know? I asked. He gave a soft little whine. We didn't open it that day. I wasn't ready yet. But deep down, I knew we had to keep going. Whatever this was, it had waited long enough. And now, with Chester leading the way, it was ready. 2 mornings later, there I was, standing in the woods, lantern in one hand, crowbar in the other, talking to my dog about a stone buried in the ground. All right, I muttered, adjusting my grip. Let's see what's under here. It took work. The moss clung to it and the slab was heavier than I expected. I worked the crowbar around carefully while Chester stood by, still and silent. After what felt like forever, I managed to lift it, but underneath wasn't dirt. It was metal, not old or rusty. This was clean, smooth, almost shiny. A brass circle about 2 feet wide with 3 little indents around the edge. I tried pressing it, but it wouldn't move. Guess this wasn't something you could just pry open. That night I went back through the notebooks, looking for anything about the stone or the word return. After an hour, I found a sketch in one of the older ones. A circle like the one in the woods labeled root seal. Underneath, a note requires triad key. 3 signs, 3 guardians. I read it out loud. Chester's ears perked up. 3 guardians. Maybe Chester wasn't the only one. Maybe there had been 2 others before him, and maybe each had left something behind. I headed back down to the cellar. This time I checked every inch. In the dirt near the wall, under a loose stone, I found the first one, a small disc made of dark wood with silver inlay. The design looked like a tree surrounded by arrows. I flipped it over. 1 word. North. I took it upstairs. Chester sniffed it once, then sat and stared at the cellar hatch. Where are the other 2? I asked. The next morning, Chester didn't head toward the woods. He went around the side of the house, straight to the old barn. I hadn't stepped in there in years. Uncle Sam used it for storage mostly. Broken furniture and old junk. I opened the creaky door. Dust and hay filled the air. Chester led me right to a collapsed workbench. Beneath a tarp and a pile of wood, I found a wooden crate. Inside was the second disc, this one made of what looked like bone, carved with sharp lines like lightning. In the middle was a single eye. The back said east. I didn't ask how Chester knew, I just thanked him and brought it back inside. 2 more days passed. Then the last piece found us. A man showed up at my door, older, maybe in his late 70s, tall, thin, with silver hair and a carved cane. He didn't smile, just looked straight at Chester. He found the seal, he said. I blinked. I'm sorry, who are you? He looked at me with tired but sharp eyes. My name is Abraham. My father was one of the last watchers. Yours was the last to leave. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. I made tea. Chester stayed right by his side. Abraham told me everything. His father had worked with my great-grandfather, watching over the land and the path beneath it. He spoke of the hollow gate like it was real, something that could open if the signs were aligned. The guardians, he said, were dogs, yes, but more than that. They were chosen. They carried memory, instinct, purpose. Chester was the last. Then Abraham pulled something from his coat, a smooth stone disc marked with waves and a crescent moon. On the back, west. I've held on to this for decades, he said, waiting for the sign. What sign? I asked. He looked out the window. The return of the guardian and the scratching. I swallowed hard. The next morning, I went back to the woods. The brass circle was still there beneath the stone. I placed the 3 discs, north, east, west, into their spots. A soft click sounded. The center started to glow, not bright, just enough to reveal a spiral turning beneath the surface. Slowly, the circle began to rotate. Then a quiet hiss echoed and it opened. Underneath was a narrow stone shaft, lined like the one in the cellar. A metal ladder clung to the side, leading into darkness. Chester didn't wait. He started climbing down, steady and calm, and I, ignoring every warning in my mind, followed him. It was deeper than I expected. I counted 38 rungs before we reached a ledge. In front of us stretched a long hallway, its walls smooth and glowing with flickering lanterns that burned without flame. We walked in silence. About 100 feet in, we entered a round chamber. It was huge, with a ceiling that vanished into darkness. At the center stood a single stone pedestal, and on it a large book bound in leather. The air was thick, not scary, just ancient, like stepping into the memory of a place. Chester walked straight to the book and sat. I opened it. Inside were names, hundreds of them, each with a date. Some from the 1800s, some as recent as the 1970s. On the last page, one simple line, Chester, April 17, no year. No explanation, just his name. He had been expected. I looked at him, and he looked right back at me. That was the moment I felt it. Really, felt it. We were part of something older, something that had been waiting quietly for a very long time. Not spooky, not magical, just forgotten. And now awake again. I closed the book slowly. The sound of the pages echoed around us. Chester stood beside me, calm as ever. We were deep underground, yet it didn't feel cold. It felt protected, like time had folded itself up and saved this place for whoever needed to find it. The names in that book weren't just ink. They were lives. People who had stood right where I was, followed their dog, and listened to something they didn't fully understand. Now I was one of them. I turned back toward the hallway we came from. The lanterns still flickered, soft and steady like they had never been out. Across the chamber was another passage, smaller, with the same spiral symbol glowing above the entrance. Chester took one step toward it, then looked back to make sure I was with him. I followed. This hallway felt different. The walls were smoother, covered in symbols, not writing, but shapes like echoes of stories too old to tell. Chester didn't stop. He walked like he already knew the way. 10 minutes later, we reached a door. Old wood, cracked with age, braced with iron. No handle, just a spiral carved deep into the middle. Chester sat in front of it and gave a single, low bark. The spiral shimmered. Then slowly the door opened. Inside was a natural cavern. Wet limestone walls, water dripping, a stream winding gently through the floor. And at the far end, something shimmered. A mirror, but not really. It rippled like water even though nothing touched it. I stepped closer. The air buzzed like a storm waiting to speak. The mirror showed a forest, but not mine. The trees were wilder, the colors richer, too sharp to be real. Then it shifted. A boy appeared with a dog that looked just like Chester. Same eyes, same coat. They stood beside a fire pit. The boy placed a wooden disc into the flames. Then the image changed. The boy had grown older. Now a man, still with the dog standing on a hill. The sky behind them a strange purple. Then it vanished. I reached toward the mirror. My hand passed through. Not like water or glass, but like reaching into a space that had forgotten how to be solid. I turned to Chester. "Is this where you came from?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We left the cavern, but the memory stayed behind my eyes. The boy, the dog, the discs. It was all connected, and I was just beginning to see how deep this path went. Back in the chamber, Abraham was waiting. I hadn't even heard him arrive. He stood beside the book, hands folded. "I wondered if you'd go beyond," he said. I nodded. "What is it?" He looked down the corridor. "Some call it the fold. It's where past and future meet, where memory isn't about time. It's about sound and shape. A place where guardians go. Sometimes they bring others back. Have you ever crossed it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, my father told me about it. He said when the time comes, the dogs will know." "Why now?" I asked. "Why me?" Abraham looked at Chester. "Because the path has been quiet for too long. Because something woke up. Maybe something's returning, or maybe something's about to leave." Then he handed me a key. "For the old shed," he said. "There's something you need to see." That evening, I went out to the shed. The key turned without. A fight, and the door groaned open like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, everything smelled like rust and pine needles. I dug through the mess until I found it. An old film projector sitting on top of a trunk labeled Corwin. Inside the trunk were reels, dozens of them, and notebooks filled with sketches, symbols, and diagrams I couldn't make sense of. I carried the first reel into the house and set the projector up in the living room. Chester lay quietly on the rug, watching. The film was black and white, silent and shaky. It showed my great-grandfather in the field behind the house, standing beside a tall, thin man in a wide hat. They were lowering something wrapped in cloth into the ground. Then a dog entered the frame, shaggy and still, just like Chester. The men looked surprised. The dog simply waited. The reel ended. I watched it again. There was something in the way that dog sat, like he understood what the men didn't. I watched more reels. Some showed the woods, others the stone slab being unearthed then hidden again. Each time a dog watched. Each time one man was gone by the end. That night I couldn't sleep. My dreams were filled with spirals, mirrors, and voices that spoke in color instead of sound. In the morning, Chester scratched the floor, just once, like a nudge, not a command. I opened the hatch and went down, to the cellar again. This time I brought a notebook. I didn't write because I had answers. I wrote because I knew someone else might need them someday. Someone would follow, like I had followed Chester, because something was waiting for us deeper under the fold. The next morning, Chester scratched the floor again. This wasn't just a reminder anymore, it was a push. We'd already seen strange places, hidden rooms, a mirror that showed impossible things, but now the air in the house felt different. Not heavy, just waiting like a held breath. I spent the morning sorting through everything. Discs, film reels, maps, books. The name Corwin kept appearing, not like a warning, more like a trail marker. He hadn't vanished, he'd moved on, and I was beginning to believe he wanted to be followed. I opened the notebook Abraham had given me, the one with the third disc. It had belonged to Corwin. Inside were drawings of doorways, stars, and paths that looped in on themselves. But what caught my heart were the sketches of dogs, pages full of them, each labeled with a name, a date, and one word: witness. That's when it hit me. Chester wasn't just leading me, he was here to see, to remember, just like the others before him. That afternoon I walked the edge of the property. Snow had melted early, and the earth was soft beneath my boots. Chester followed close as we passed the old tree line and a rusted fence. There, tucked behind a patch of sumac, I found a stone marker, small, overgrown. I cleared the vines and wiped off the dirt. 3 spirals all meeting in the center. I touched it. A quiet click came from the ground. Then the stone began to move, not down but sideways, like it had just been waiting for someone to come looking. A staircase revealed itself beneath. Chester sniffed the air and headed down. I followed. The stairs spiraled down and down, carved from white stone that faintly glowed. We reached the bottom and stepped into a narrow hallway. The walls were lined with round glass panels, like ship portholes, each one showing something different. I stopped at one. A man walked through mist with a dog at his side. Another showed a boy at a riverside, a hound resting by his feet. Then, a woman digging under a tree, her terrier barking beside her. Each panel showed one person and one dog, always searching, always together. At the end of the hall was a final panel. This one was empty, just blackness. I reached out and touched it. The darkness moved. Then suddenly, it was us, me and Chester, in the woods that very morning. The glass fogged up, then cleared. The image was gone. I stepped back, heart thudding. Chester didn't stop. He walked forward, and I followed. We stepped into a new chamber, unlike anything before. It was round and open to the sky, but the trees above were strange, tall, white, their leaves shining like silver feathers. At the center stood a small wooden box on a pedestal. No lock, no hinges, just a lid, and one single word carved on top. I remember opening it. Inside the box were 6 smooth stones, warm like they'd been held before. Each one had a symbol, a spiral, a tree, an eye, a wave, the moon, and one I'd never seen before, a paw print. Chester sat beside the pedestal, calm and quiet. I placed my hand on the paw print stone. It gave off a soft pulse. The chamber dimmed and a low hum filled the air. The trees rustled, though no wind blew. A soft glow lit up beneath our feet. Then I saw them, not ghosts, not just flickers of the past, but people like me, walking the same paths, opening the same doors, always with a dog beside them. A line unbroken, witnesses across centuries. The vision faded, the hum stopped. It was just me and Chester again. I pocketed the stones, and we left in silence, back through the hallway of memories, up the winding stairs and into the woods. By the time we reached the house, the sun was sinking behind the trees. Abraham was waiting on the porch. He didn't look surprised. "I saw the dome," I said. He nodded. "The archive. That's one of them," he said. "There are more." Then he handed me a photo. It was old, fraying at the edges. It showed Chester, or one who looked just like him, standing next to a man by a lighthouse. The year, 1891. "They return," Abraham said, "when it's time." "Return from where?" I asked. He looked toward the woods. That's the part no one's ever written down. That night I couldn't sleep. I left the stones on the bedside table. Chester rested on the floor, head between his paws. I opened my notebook again and kept writing, not because I had answers, But because I now knew the story wasn't mine alone, it belonged to everyone who ever followed the scratching, everyone who ever listened. Each morning, Chester's paws tapping across the floor became my rhythm, like a quiet metronome for the day. But on the 6th morning, just before dawn, I woke to silence. No pacing, no scratching. He wasn't by the bed, not in the kitchen either. I found him sitting by the hatch, staring at the floor, not anxious, not urgent, just waiting, an invitation. We descended together for the 5th time. The lantern in my hand flickered as we walked, our shadows. Dancing across stone walls, the cellar felt alive, like it had been breathing while we were gone, just waiting for us to come back. Chester led me down a new path, one we hadn't seen before. Maybe it had only just revealed itself. At the end was a door, newer than anything else we'd found. Metal frame, reinforced glass, like something out of a secret lab. No lock, no keypad, just a spiral carved faintly into the steel. Chester lifted his paw and tapped it. The door clicked open. Inside was a room, no bigger than a shed, but every inch of wall was covered, shelves filled with jars, boxes, canisters, all labeled, some with names, others with dates. A few had strange symbols I didn't know. There were recordings too, flash drives, tapes, reels like the ones I'd watched before. This wasn't just an archive, it was a vault. I picked up a canister. Witness Protocol 1912, G. Reynolds. Another said, transmission failed, gate 1944. A folder wrapped in twine read, do not attempt alone. I opened it. Inside were maps, sketches, tangled arrows, looping diagrams that looked like they belonged to the stars. And then a letter typed dated July 5th, 1945. If you're reading this, it said, then the gate is unstable again, and this time they may come through. The writer talked about something trying to breach one of the other spirals, something held back before only because the dogs were watching. Then a sentence that made my skin go cold. The dogs know. They always know before we do. Chester was sitting near another shelf now, his gaze fixed on a black box. I walked over, opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens, all of Chester. Different years, different people, same eyes, same coat. One was from 1903, Chester next to a coal miner in West Virginia. Another in front of a lighthouse in Oregon, 1931. Then 1958, 1977, 2002. Always with someone new, always looking straight at the camera, always beside him. This wasn't a legend. This wasn't a story passed down wrong. He was real. He'd always been real. Then I opened the last file. It had my last name on it. I froze, sealed in wax. The spiral pressed into it. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter. To the next in our line, that's how the letter began. If you're reading this, then Chester has returned to you. That means the gate is open again, or close. Your job isn't to fight or to shut it. You're here to remember, to watch, to guide. You're a watcher. The dog knows what you don't. Don't try to lead him, just follow. You're not the master, you're the witness. I sat there for a long time, those words echoing in my head. Chester hadn't come to me by accident. He came because it was my turn. Later that afternoon, Abraham came back. I didn't ask how he knew. It was just like him to show up when it mattered. We sat together on the porch for a while, saying nothing. I handed him the box of photos. He flipped through them slowly, nodding like he'd known all along. This is bigger than us, he finally said. Bigger than the dogs too, in a way. But they're the bridge. The bridge to what? I asked. To what we've forgotten, he said. And what we're meant to protect. Then he pulled something from his coat, a compass, old and worn. But when I opened the lid, the needle didn't point north. It spun, then settled, aiming toward the woods. It only works for watchers, he told me, and only when the time is right. That night I stood at the tree line again, compass in my hand, stones in my coat, Chester by my side. The air was still. The stars were so bright, it felt like the sky had cleared just for us. The woods I thought I knew now felt like something ancient, alive, breathing just beneath the surface. I could feel it. The spiral beneath the earth, the rhythm of the land, the breath of the gate. We weren't finished. Chester looked up at me, then stepped into the woods. I followed. As we walked, the forest changed. The deeper we went, the less I recognized. It wasn't just the dim light or the frost. It was the way the trees leaned in, the hush in the air, like we were stepping into a place that had been waiting for us all along. Chester led the way, steady and sure. I kept the compass open. Its needle spun until we passed an old trail, then locked in place, pointing to a stand of pines I'd never noticed. Beyond them was a clearing, and in the middle of that clearing stood a tower, 3 stories tall, stone and ironwood. Its surface, worn smooth by wind and time, moss climbed up the walls and a single arched door waited at the base. Closed, no windows, just carvings, spirals over and over again. Chester sat before the door and looked back at me. I stepped forward and pressed my palm to the iron. The door opened with a low groan. Inside it was empty. No furniture, no dust, just a stone staircase that curled up along the walls. At the top, soft light waited, not from electricity or fire, but something gentler. The room was small. A skylight above let the moonlight in. Wooden panels lined the walls, each one with a handprint, dozens of them, big and small. Every palm marked with a spiral. I looked at my own hand, then at Chester. "Are we supposed to add ours?" I asked. Chester nudged a drawer in the wall. Inside was a bowl of clay, cool and wrapped in linen. Beside it, a tray filled with ash. I pressed my palm into the clay, then dipped my fingers in the ash. I touched the spiral on the wall. It pulsed. The room began to hum, a low, steady sound. The skylight brightened. Then from the center of the floor, something rose, a pedestal with a spinning metal ring at its center. An image appeared above it, not a mirror, not a memory, a gate. Unlike the underground ones, this one stood tall in the middle of a blue stone desert. Figures moved near it, blurry, hunched shapes in the distance. Then one stepped forward. A dog. Chester growled, quiet, not angry, just aware. The image blinked out. The gate closed. The pedestal sank into the floor. I looked at Chester. His ears were back. Something had changed. We left the tower in silence. Outside, the forest was colder. Frost coated the ground thick, and somewhere in the distance, I heard a sound, a low, vibrating note, like a whistle you can barely hear. Back home, I lit a fire and laid the compass and stones on the table. They felt warmer now, like they'd come alive. Chester lay near the hearth. He didn't sleep, he just watched the window. I flipped through my journal. Dates, places, objects, things I'd seen, things I hadn't understood until now. Patterns started to appear, names repeated across decades. Symbols matched ones carved into caves and towers. The next morning, Chester led me somewhere I never expected, the local library. It might sound odd, but he stopped right at the door and wouldn't budge until I went inside. I asked Mrs. Klein, the librarian who'd known me since I was a kid, if there were any old local archives. She showed me a back room I'd never noticed before. These were donated after Sam passed, she said. Didn't know what to do with them, but figured someone might want to look someday. Inside were boxes marked Estate of Sam Howard. I opened one. It was filled with old photos, journals, and even a full copy of one of Corwin's ledgers. At the bottom was a folder labeled The Witness Cycle. Inside were maps, not of places, but of events. Timelines connecting names to strange sky signs, eclipses, meteor showers, storms, all matching when a guardian was said to return. The last date circled, April 17th, my birthday. The same day, Chester first scratched the floor. That night, I showed it to Abraham. He nodded slowly. "The cycle's tightening," he said. "They don't just come through the gates. Sometimes they fall through the cracks." "What does that mean?" I asked. "That they don't always arrive in shape," he replied. "Sometimes. They come in sound, in dreams, in wind." That night the wind howled hard, shaking the windows and moaning through the chimney. But Chester didn't move. He sat alert until dawn. When I woke, he was gone. Panic hit fast. I called for him, searched the woods, every trail, even the cellar. Nothing, until I saw a fresh paw print in the frost leading to the barn. He was there, sitting beside a broken window, staring at an old shelf I hadn't touched in years. I followed his gaze. Behind a tarp was a small box. Inside, just one item, a bell, not made of metal but stone, carved with tiny markings and a spiral at its base. I picked it up. When it rang, it wasn't sharp. It was deep and full, like a hum you feel in your chest. Chester howled just once. Then everything went still. The wind stopped. The forest, the house, even the air seemed to pause, like the world was listening. I sat in the barn long after the sound faded. Chester didn't move, eyes fixed on the open window, like he was still waiting. That sound, it felt like something ancient had heard us. Not loud, but real. A ripple through the bones of the earth. I placed the bell on the mantel next to the stones and the compass. Everything we'd found, every piece of this strange puzzle was starting to fit, but not like instructions, more like a rhythm, like something old beating just under the ground. That night I dreamed in spirals, not images, more like feelings, moving inward, expanding outward. I walked through corridors made of wind, down into places where time spun in circles, and at the center, always a gate, always closed, always guarded by a dog with Chester's eyes. When I woke, Chester was gone again, but this time I didn't panic. I got dressed, took the compass, and let it guide me. It spun twice, then pointed west, followed it through the trees, past silver-leaved domes, and an old stone marker carved with the word return. The forest felt tighter, like it was drawing me in. I heard a stream before I saw it, clear and winding between roots and rocks. Chester stood on the other side, waiting. Next to him, something new, a Chiron. 7 stones stacked carefully on a flat rock. Around it, symbols carved into the trees. Spirals, yes, but also others. Circles, a crescent moon, and a figure standing next to a dog. I stepped across the stream. Chester poured gently at the base of the Chiron. I knelt and moved the top stone. Beneath it was a bundle of cloth. Inside, old papers wrapped around a fragment of bone. The paper was fragile, but I could still read the words. A letter written in a slow, looping hand. They don't all come back whole. Some return in pieces. This is part of the one who watched during the last breach. He chose to stay beyond. We remember him in stone, in sound. Chester lay down next to the Chiron and closed his eyes. The letter spoke of a place deep beneath the earth, older than any vault or tomb. A place without walls, without shelves. A library of voices, a listening hollow, where time folds in on itself, where echoes remain. Only a true watcher, it said, could find it. I brought the bone fragment home. That night I poured through the journals again, searching for a clue I'd missed. At last, in Corwin's oldest notebook, I found it. A drawing of a spiral that didn't close, and in the center, 4 words, hollow of return, only through silence. Didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but Chester seemed to. The next morning, Chester didn't scratch the floor or nudge the hatch. He just stood by the door, quietly waiting. We walked deeper into the woods than ever before. The trees spaced out, and even though it was daylight, everything dimmed. I began to feel, not hear, something. It was like the world was holding its breath. In a clearing, the grass grew in a perfect ring. At the center was a flat stone, half buried, with a shallow groove carved into it. No symbols, no spirals, just that quiet space. Chester sat beside it. I placed the bone fragment into the groove, and just like that, everything stopped. The breeze, the birds, even the silence deepened. Then, the stone sank and a hidden tunnel opened below, dry and narrow with stairs made right from the earth. Chester went first. I followed. We descended deeper than I'd ever been, past the cellar, past the vault, into a silence so thick it almost felt like it had weight. At the bottom was a chamber. It had no walls or ceiling, just vast space lit by nothing, yet somehow still visible. Shapes drifted in the air, memories made of light. I saw a woman planting a tree, a boy and his dog walking through snow. They flickered and changed, like thoughts floating by. Then a voice, not heard but understood, spoke. You are not the first. You are not the last. The line continues. The gate listens. Chester stood before one of the flickers. I saw myself, standing, at the forest's edge holding the bell. When it rang, the path opened. It was my time. Other images passed through. The old tower, the gate in the desert, a coming storm, a rip in the sky, wind that screamed like pain. They will try again, the voice said. I wanted to ask who or what, but the silence just deepened. Then, suddenly I was back in the clearing. The stone was gone. Chester was still there. He shook out his fur and started walking home. That night I wrote down everything, every word, every image, because I knew this was part of the cycle, part of being a witness. Chester curled up at my feet. Outside, the wind picked up, but this time it didn't sound scary. It sounded like breathing, like the earth itself had finally exhaled. For days, the wind moved gently across the land. It wasn't a storm, no thunder, no rain, just a steady, living breath through the trees. I kept the journal open on the kitchen table, writing every morning and night, not just what I saw, but how it felt. The softness of moss after the tunnel, the rhythm of Chester's pause, the quiet between each step. These weren't just memories, they were signs. On the 3rd day, Chester scratched the floor again, but this time just once. Then he circled the spot and laid down, watching. I didn't open the hatch right away. First, I gathered my tools, the compass, the bell, the stones. I added a flashlight. Then, I opened the hatch. We descended together, past the main chamber, the vault, the image hall. But the listening hollow was gone. The tunnel in the glade had vanished. Chester wasn't leading us there this time. He stopped in the old map room, the place where I'd first found the discs. Something had shifted. A stone had moved on the wall, revealing a small glass orb hidden behind it. It was cool and cloudy to the touch, and inside was something moving, like light trapped in a dream. I took it and placed it beside the bell. When I did, the light inside the orb pulsed softly like it recognized the others. That evening, Abraham arrived. As usual, he didn't say how he knew. He looked at the orb, then at Chester. "They're marking the path," he said. "Who is?" I asked. He looked at me with quiet weight in his eyes. "The ones who crossed without warning. The ones who slipped through last time. They're leaving memory trails for each other. Anchors." I turned the orb slowly in my hand. "What happens if they're all found?" Abraham's voice dropped. "Then the fold starts to thin and the gate won't hold." The next morning, the compass pointed north. Chester and I followed an old dirt road, past the edge of our land, through a broken fence near the abandoned train tracks. Chester walked slower this time, stopping often to sniff the ground. He led me to a tunnel I hadn't entered since I was a kid. At the far end was a slightly open metal door. I pulled it the rest of the way. Inside was a room I didn't know existed. Mirrors lined the walls, but they didn't reflect us. Each one showed glimpses of other lives still happening. A girl painting on a rooftop, a man carving a symbol into a tree, a child feeding birds. Then one mirror froze. It showed me, sitting in my kitchen, writing in the journal, Chester at my feet. But Chester's reflection didn't appear. He stepped toward the mirror. It went dark, and a slot opened below it. A new orb rolled out. This one, glowing blue. I picked it up. Chester turned to leave, and as we stepped into the woods, the wind just stopped, all of it, like someone hit pause. We returned home. I placed the new orb beside the first. They spun slowly, each on their own rhythm. I wrote, "In the journal, second marker found, mirrors beneath tracks." Chester's reflection did not move. The wind stopped. There is something coming. I don't know what. That night, Chester stood at the back door and barked once, sharp, loud. I opened it. The trees at the edge of the yard shimmered. For a moment, they looked taller, off, like an old TV flickering. Then everything stilled. The wind picked up again. Chester lay down without a sound. 2 days passed before the compass spun again, wild, then finally settling southeast. We followed it across empty cornfields and past old fences until we found a shed I'd never seen before. It hadn't been there last time. Inside was a spiral staircase. No roof, no walls, just stairs winding down. At the bottom was a perfect round room, just a table in the center. On it, a note. "If you've come this far, you are the current witness. You are not alone, they are watching, they are waiting. You must find the third." Underneath, a red flickering orb. 3 orbs now, 3 rhythms, 3 paths. I tucked it into my bag. Chester stood at the stairs, looking up. Outside, the trees started to bend, not from the wind, but from something else. The fold was starting to wake. The final gate had yet to open. After that night, the trees never really stopped moving. Even when there was no wind, they swayed gently, like something high above the canopy was breathing, or watching. I placed the 3 orbs on the mantel, arranged in a triangle, the bell in the center, the compass in front. Every evening they hummed a little louder. Every morning their lights deepened in color, like they were trying to tell me something urgently. Then, without warning, something changed again. I was out back stacking firewood when Chester suddenly stood, alert, staring not at the woods, but at the sky. I looked up. The clouds were spiraling slowly, tightly, like water swirling around a drain that wasn't there. The compass in my coat warmed. I dropped the logs, ran inside, and pulled it out. The needle was spinning wildly. Then it froze, pointing straight down. Chester was already at the hatch. I didn't even hesitate. We went deep, past the cellar, past the vault, past the old map room, beyond even the faded trail to the listening hollow. We reached the oldest part of the passage, where stone turned to dirt and the walls pressed close. The compass glowed faintly. The bell trembled in my bag. Then we saw it. A gate, not like the others. It was made of root and iron, woven together like it had grown there. It pulsed gently, like something alive under the earth. A spiral carved into its center glowed gold. Chester barked once. The gate opened with a groan. Beyond it was a tunnel made of light. The walls shimmered, thin glowing images like a movie playing on soft glass. A woman lighting a lantern, a man whispering to a dog under a red moon, a child asleep under a silver tree. Chester walked slowly, carefully. I followed, barely breathing. The tunnel opened into a chamber, round and familiar. I had seen it before, in the mirror room, in the listening hollow, but now it was full. Dozens of orbs floated around a raised platform, each glowing in its own color, each moving like part of a slow dance. At the center was a chair, and in it sat a man, not alive, not anymore. The man in the chair was mummified, preserved by time and silence. A spiral was tattooed on the back of his hand. At his feet was an open notebook with the last words, "Cycle incomplete." Third breach predicted. Guardian present. Successor arrived, awaiting Gates' reply. I stepped forward, and the orbs around us began to spin faster. The bell in my pack started to vibrate. Chester didn't move. His tail was low, his ears forward. I knelt and placed my hand on the notebook. The room grew dark and all the orbs stopped. A door opened behind the platform, leading to a spiral staircase, descending into pure light. I looked at Chester. He glanced at me, and then down the stairs. I nodded, and we walked down. It was warm, too quiet. The silence was thick, like hearing only your heartbeat and breath. The walls of the stairwell vibrated with memories, scratches on the floor, the cold metal plate hidden beneath it, the first turn of the compass, each moment layered on the next. At the bottom, we found a cavern with no light source, yet everything was visible. In the center was a pool, perfectly still like a mirror set into the ground. Chester sat at its edge, waiting. I approached it. The surface didn't reflect the room, but what came next? I saw a stone door with a dozen spirals carved into it. Beneath it were symbols of the three orbs. It opened briefly, and through it I saw figures, shadow-thin, four-legged, their eyes glowing. They looked like dogs, but not like Chester. They were hollow. The pool shimmered and went still again. I looked at Chester. He didn't flinch. I whispered, "Is that where we're going?" He blinked slowly, then stood behind us. The sound of a gate, creaking, reached us. A strained, deep groan. The chamber rumbled as the gate fought to open. Chester stood beside me, unmoving, as the ground pulsed with the weight of the sound. My fingers curled around the strap of my pack, where the bell and the three glowing orbs rested. The compass had stopped spinning, pointing to a direction that no longer existed in this world. Then the pool shimmered again, not with a vision, but a reflection of the room, of us. Behind Chester stood another dog, taller, leaner, its eyes hollow, shimmering with static. I stepped back, but Chester remained still. The gate creaked louder. Dust fell. Stones shifted. Finally, the gate opened, and the air went quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the stillness of waiting. What came through wasn't a flood or a monster. It was a shape, like smoke given thought, a memory learning to walk. It flickered with faces, hands, paws, lost things, half remembered. The Guardian, I realized, wasn't just protection. It was memory. Chester stepped forward, then another. He didn't growl or bark. He just stood before the shape, waiting. The shape paused, and then, like a wave folding into itself, it stepped aside, revealing the real gate, the one from the vision, carved in stone with spirals, and the three symbols of the orbs. Chester looked back at me and walked forward. The gate opened as he approached, like it had been waiting for him. I followed him through. On the other side, the air changed. It was thicker, but cleaner. The light didn't have a source. It just was. Warm, but not hot. The space felt massive, like standing inside a cathedral made of memory. At the center was a stone circle with a single column rising up. On the column sat a small bowl. Chester walked to it and sat. I understood. I reached into my bag and took out the bell. The orbs pulsed faster as I moved them closer to the bowl, the light from them streaming toward the column like threads of color. When I placed the bell in the bowl, the column lit from within, and a pure tone rose from the floor, like a single breath becoming music. The light wrapped the room, and the spirals on the walls began to move. The door behind us sealed, and the wall ahead opened. For a moment I saw everything, the fold laid bare, the cycles of return, the Guardians sent through time to keep watch. I saw Chester, not just here, but everywhere, every dog, every time. He wasn't just a Guardian. He was the gate's voice, its messenger, its memory. He turned to look at me one last time, then walked into the light and disappeared. The orbs went still. The room dimmed. The bell melted into the stone and I was left alone. Not empty, not afraid, just still. I walked back through the stone door, now open again. The strange form was gone. The pool had gone still, its purpose fulfilled. I wasn't the same. I emerged from the hidden path beneath my house just before dawn. The air was still. The trees stood straight. The sky was clear. There was no wind, just silence, the kind that fills you without crowding. I walked to the mantel. The orbs no longer glowed. The compass no longer pointed anywhere. But I left them there, and I opened the journal to a fresh page. I began to write, not about what had happened, but about what would come next. Because someday, someone else would need to know. When the trees begin to shift again, when the compass spins, when a dog scratches the floor like he's searching for something buried, maybe someone like me will follow him and remember.